Here's the video I know you all have been waiting for. Here's how to make my Nerf HPA/LPA Long Strike XBZ Blaster. There's not too much to go over at the start of this video, just get ready for a full-on how-to. It's very in-depth and it should be able to show you how to make one of these. It's a bit of a long process, but stay to the end and I guarantee you should be able to know, if I've done a good job, how to make one of these beasts. So let's get straight into the video. For my setup, I use 8mm hose, so my push fits will reflect my hose choice. You will need one 3/8 male push, one 1/2 inch male push, one 1/2 inch female push, and two 1/8 male push fits. Depending what blaster or shell you use, you may want to use elbow or angled push fits. I use a 1/8 elbow push for my XBZ connection. For your airline, I recommend a ball valve cutoff switch. This one has a male thread of 1/2 inch and a female thread of 3/8. For your airline and blaster connections, I use Nitto fittings. Get a female to female Nitto as well as two female Nitto fittings, with one having female threads and the other with male threads. I use this system with the air hose to work with my LPA compressor and my blaster. If you'd like to use an LPA compressor as well, use the setup like I have here. An MJV03 valve switch. This valve allows the tank to be filled and fired. An XBZ tank, for obvious reasons. A small amount of 25mm PVC and a 25mm PVC end cap. 6mm or 8mm air hose. I use 8mm and my push fit choice reflects that. If you use 6mm, use 6mm push fits. There are no performance gains for choosing a larger hose by my experimentation. A closed breech. You can make a brass breech, aluminium breech, or CPVC breech, as long as it completely seals. Breeches will vary from blaster to blaster. And a blaster of your choice to put the system in. For the tools you will need, start with a drill and drill bits, Teflon or fittings tape, PVC cement and epoxy or araldite, spanners and shifters. A pipe cutter is useful, and as always, let's crack open the screwdriver set. Let's start by making our airline. This will connect our blaster to our compressor, as well as cut our air source when we need to. As a given rule for this tutorial, I highly recommend wrapping your fittings in Teflon or fittings tape on every connection. Start by wrapping your male to male threaded Nitto fitting, then connect it to your female 1/2 inch push fit. Another given rule is to always tighten your connection with spanners and shifters. Next, let's make the cutoff in the airline. Get your ball valve and 3/8 push fit and connect into the female end of your ball valve. Now let's thread on the female end Nitto fitting. Next, connect up your hose. I use about 1.5 meters worth of hose, and I can mount my compressor wherever I want and the line will reach my blaster no problem, as well as giving me some movement room. Push your line into your push fits. Give it a test by hooking it up to your compressor. If you can hear air leaking, find the leak and correct the issue. If it's holding pressure, you're all done. Here is the system in all its glory. This is the air hose that comes from our airline and goes into the port of our switch. Then this line goes to our air tank, which comes out of the out port of our switch. This switch allows air to pass through and still fire our XBZ tank. When the switch is pressed, it acts as a stock QEV in the XBZ and fires the tank. Pretty simple. This setup is the basic HPA/LPA setup for anything that is single shot. If you want to integrate a semi-auto piston or other air features, build around this. You're going to need to pick a shell with lots of space. This is how much plastic I had to rip out of my LSK for everything to fit nicely. Before we put everything together, let's build our air tank. Alright, we are now on to pretty much the hardest part of the build. If you can get this right, you can do everything else, because everything else is plug and play. So let's get into making your XBZ. So first of all, you can obviously realize that this is not your standard XPZ. It has been heavily modified towards the rear of it to accept our 8mm push fit. Now this is an elbow fit. You can put on a straight, slightly arced one, any push fit you want, as long as it matches up with the hose size you choose. First of all, you're going to want to cut down your XPZ. Thankfully I've got another XPZ here. This is where you are going to want to stop cutting with your XPZ. This is a normal XPZ, and you'll pretty much tell straight away if you've got an XPZ in hand what you need to be looking for. This little tube coming off here is pretty much the exact place where you need to stop. So if you were to cut from this wall here and then sand your XPZ tank back to where this stops, you'll pretty much find where this wall is. Now make sure you stop right there, face that off on a sander, light sand on the table like that, and then that's your XPZ cutting process done. Take your time with that. You don't want a cracked tank. Definitely take your time with it. So cut on this line here, sand back to where you can no longer see this, face off at the wall. Next step in our tank is creating the back cap, so where our 8mm push fit will actually thread into. This is what we need to create. Here's one I made earlier, which is the exact replica of what's on the back of this XPZ here. So as you can see, here is our 25mm end cap, and on the inside we have our 25mm PVC. And what this does is pretty much create so that the PVC can thread over of the XPZ tank easier. Now if we didn't have this 25mm PVC on the inside of this, the cap would be very loose on the back. Now there is some sanding required in this, or dremeling. You'll probably need to not take too much off the back of your XPZ, but if you wanted to, take a little bit off the back of your XPZ, but you would definitely have to grind out a lot of the inside of this part so that these two can friction fit over the top of each other. So this cap will come all the way up to this wall here. As you can see with my XPZ, that's where the cap came up to. So this cap slides all the way along the top of that, and then will look like mine. So once you've got all your fitment done, and once this slides over the back of your tank nice and easily, we need to make our threading port. So as you can see on the back here, I've already made my port. Now you're going to need your drill, and you're going to need a 9mm drill bit. I started off with a 6.5mm drill bit, just the center, and pretty much get the porting hole done through the PVC, and then I got my 9mm drill bit and drilled straight through there. As you can see, 9mm drill bit there. And because the PVC is so soft and easy to manipulate, we can get our 8mm 1/8 inch tapped push fit and pretty much self-tap your way in there. Now I had already pre-tapped mine, so it was easier to do on screen, but that's pretty much where I stopped. And then you're going to get one of your shifters and thread that all the way through. Now that is a very tight friction fit and is a pretty good air seal stock like that, but we're going to make it even better. So once that's on pretty tight, we are up to the gluing phase. Now if you can see in there, the 1/8 thread is a bit higher than the actual wall thickness of the 25mm end bit. And that helps us in this part, where you're going to pretty much need half of your epoxy, and what you're going to want to do is glue. You're going to want to pour and fill up the whole bottom section as much as you can, making sure no glue overlaps and falls down into that tube. And that will create the air seal from the inner part of the XPZ. You can also put some around the outside, which I think I did. I did put a little bit around the outside just to make sure it was in there nice and snug, but you can definitely get away with just pouring it on the inside. Once all that's done, this is your final part. You're going to get your end cap, which now fits over the back of your XPZ, and the XPZ, which fits now inside of your end cap. You need your PVC glue. Pour this glue around the outside of here and on the inside of there, and push them tightly together and mesh them as snug as you can. Let that dry for a few hours, maybe even come back a day later to it, just to make sure that this is dry. After that, if you want to double check and just make sure everything is going to be a complete air seal, you can put more 5-minute epoxy around the outside like I did, just to create that air seal and just to make sure that everything is going to be nice and sealed and it's going to run smoothly with no dramas. You're not going to have to try and glue up somewhere that you don't want to, try and locate air leaks. That stuff definitely annoys me a lot, and I know and I know it'll annoy you guys too. So take your time with this, make sure you understand this part, rewatch it a few times just to make sure you know what you're doing, and then go ahead for it. Let's get to work on our complete system. Start by creating the intake line for our blaster, with the male to female threaded nitto fitting and a 1-inch male push fit. Here is where my air line runs on my long strike. I left about 18 to 19 centimeters worth of line. Cut your air line and push into your intake nitto. Now for our switch. We will need to put two 1/8 male push fits into both ports of our switch. This is how it should look. Let's start assembling. Connect the tank to our output of your switch. Depending on what blaster or shell you decide to use or create will depend on the lengths of air line you are running throughout your blaster. Now connect up your intake line. And your system is complete. Hook your system up to a compressor and give it a few test fires. If it's leaking air, locate the leak and correct it. If your tank is leaking, try sanding it back and applying a very strong 3-day epoxy. For an XBZ plastic tank, I do not recommend running the PSI any higher than 80. You'll be getting solid performance even at 65 PSI, which is where I usually keep my tank at. For you to use the system, you will need a closed breech. You can use brass, aluminium or PVC to create one. For brass, I use 17/32 with 9/16 over the top of it. The 9/16 fits perfectly into the front of the XBZ tank. I cut out a clip well for my darts to feed and used the reverse breech closing method to seal it. I used about 50 centimeters worth of brass for my barrel, and I also have a scar on the end of it. Now place everything into your blaster and your HPA/LPA build is ready to go. I know it's something I needed for a long time, so I finally bought a chronograph, so I'll just show what you've just made, what it's actually hitting at. So this is running about 70 to 80 PSI, which is high for an XBZ. So let's see what this setup can crank out. That was just the tip. So that's 239, 240, 249, 251, 269, 273, and 250. So that was about 8 shots, and that was hitting pretty consistently. Definitely a very hard hitting blaster, and is, in my opinion, a proper Nerf sniper. So yep, that's pretty much it, guys. That's what your powerhouse is going to achieve. 250 right there. And there you go, guys. If I've done a good enough job of this how-to, you should be able to know how to make one of these beasts now. I hope to see a lot more out on the field and out in the wild now. And I definitely think a lot of people will be catching the air blaster bug once you build one of these beasts. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. If you want to check out some more how-to videos, check out my description The playlist will be down there if you want to check out some other how-tos. If you like my content, feel free to subscribe. If you want to catch up with me when I'm not making videos, check my Facebook, Instagram and Discord server in the description. And I'll see you in the next one.